How would Aristotle respond to the ethical skeptic? How would the utilitarian? How would the Kantian? So just think about somebody who comes into ethics class, bounds in and says, I think ethics is bunk. This is all nonsense. Why are we even talking about this? And I think what the Aristotle would say, if you look at the Aristotle reading, at one point he says, if you're under 20 or 30, I don't even want to talk to you because you don't have enough experience to be able to talk about what makes the good life and what goes into the good life, what sort of people we want to be or should be. And so I think what Aristotle would say to that ethical skeptic is something like, you're just too immature to talk to me right now, right? Go out of the room, go have some experiences. You'll come back and you'll be more serious about discussing what goes into a good life and trying to figure out what makes a good human. So I think that Aristotle's response is going to be sort of a non-response. He's just sort of going to dismiss the ethical skeptic. The utilitarian is going to say, listen, ethical skeptic, you know that pleasure, it's obvious that pleasure is good and suffering is bad, right? You know that every time when you experience it, you can tell that this is the good stuff and that's the bad stuff. It has this sort of goodness built into this and badness built into it. It's not like when I see blue, I'm like, well, blue, that's really, I can see the goodness in it, right? It seems like pleasure is the one that the experience of has some sort of interesting character to it, which the utilitarian wants to tell us is goodness. And so that's his response to the ethical skeptic, right? That the ethical skeptic is missing the fact that he can, I mean, he presumably the ethical skeptic does feel pleasure and pain, and the utilitarian is going to tell the ethical skeptic that he's missing the fact that he's just as aware that there's good and badness in the world as the rest of us are because he's experienced pleasure and he's experienced pain. And then Kant is going to say something like, he's going to give this long argument about how reason demands that you follow the formula of humanity or the formula of universal law, right? And that the ethical skeptic is just a bad reasoner because he's not noticing that he's under these obligations. Okay, so moving on to Aristotle's functions and the function argument. So that comes in Aristotle in book 1, chapter 7, I believe. If you look at my notes, I describe what the argument is, and you can read Aristotle's writing it out in the readings for the Aristotle week. And it's something like Aristotle wants to say, you know, why is this the good life for man? Well, because you can identify what something's function is by what's unique about it, right? So what's unique about a door is that it allows it regulates easy access into an enclosed space, right? That seems to be what's unique about doors. You know, there's lots of doors can be red, but so can a lot of other things. Doors can be made of wood, but so can a lot of other things. But it seems like doors, maybe what's unique about doors is the fact that they regulate easy access in and out of an enclosed space. Although I'm worried about how I can differentiate doors from windows. But what Aristotle wants to say is once I know what's unique about doors, then I know what a door's function is to regulate easy access in and out of an enclosed space. And then I know what a good door is, right? A good door is one that fulfills this function well, regulating easy access in and out of an enclosed space. And then what Aristotle wants to say is the same sort of argument he wants to apply it to humans. He wants to say, well, what's unique about humans? It seems like we live our lives, and we live our lives using our reflective judgment, right? Our reason. We take in information, we weigh it, and then we make a judgment, unlike animals who don't have the ability to sort of step back from their impulses and weigh all the different considerations around them and try to decide, well, this is a lie, so maybe I shouldn't say it, but I'm going to hurt this person if I do, and of course, selfishly, I want to tell it, right? So what the virtue ethicist wants to say, or what Aristotle wants to say with this function argument, is what's unique about humans is this sort of way in which we take in information and we consider it and reflect on it and weigh it, and then take it as, you know, pros and cons, and then issue a judgment. And since that's what's unique about humans, Aristotle wants to say that that's our function, and so a good human is one who does this well. And then, of course, he thinks that if you're a good reasoner, then you'll have these, what he's going to say the virtues are is just your ability to reason well in certain areas of human life, right? So courage is the virtue, is the ability to reason well about danger, knowing when to rush in and knowing when not to rush in. Honesty is the virtue of knowing when to tell a lie and when not to tell a lie. So I know that the fact that this is false is a reason not to say it, but I also know that sometimes that's outweighed by other concerns, and I know when that is. And I can make the correct judgment in any particular case because I know the value of telling the truth, and I know I don't overvalue it and I don't undervalue it. That's what Aristotle wants to say honesty is, and that's why a well-functioning human is a virtuous human, right? Because the virtues are just us reasoning well in all of these respects, and dealing with lies, and dealing with other people, and dealing with danger. So Aristotle's function argument, the claim is just going to be that Aristotle's trying to build his whole ethical system out of these functions, that are trying to identify what humanity's function is, and then saying that a good human, right, but a good human life in particular, is somehow derived from what our function is as a type of being, as the sort of thing we are, what the sort of thing we are, the function of the sort of thing we are, helps him identify what would make a good one of us. So then I'm going to move on to Aristotle on pleasure, utilitarian on pleasure, ethical egoist on pleasure, and Kantian on pleasure. So Aristotle on pleasure, Aristotle says that pleasure is good, right? He wants to say that a part of the good life is being rewarded with pleasure for all your virtuous activities. Of course, there's a little bit of an element of luck there. He thinks that if you're virtuous, then you're going to get pleasure from being virtuous. So if I have the virtue of honesty, not only am I able to reason well, I'm also I take pleasure from when I tell the truth and exercise my reason well. But Aristotle's going to say there's much more to a good life than just pleasure, right? Pleasure is just a feeling in the brain. Of course, a good life involves a lot more than that for Aristotle. It seems like for a utilitarian, I mean, he's not really focused on the good life, but the good life is just going to be maximizing your pleasure, or maximizing other people's pleasure, really maximizing pleasure in the world. So the utilitarian, pleasure is the only good in the world, and suffering, displeasure, suffering is the only bad. So it takes on a very different character for the utilitarian. The ethical egoist is very similar to the utilitarian. You'll notice we talk only about the ethical egoist in the Aristotle week, where I give you my little notes on Aristotle, and I contrast virtue ethics with, it's actually my notes on virtue ethics. I contrast virtue ethics with the ethical egoist, and the ethical egoist wants to maximize pleasure. Just the difference between the ethical egoist and the utilitarian is they both think that pleasure is valuable. It's just that the utilitarian thinks that pleasure itself is valuable, which is why I have to maximize it wherever it can occur. The total pleasure in the universe is what I'm trying to raise. Whereas the ethical egoist thinks that it's only my pleasure, my personal pleasure, which is valuable. So that's why the ethical egoist is only trying to maximize his pleasure. And then the Kantian on pleasure, Kant's going to say that, I guess I haven't actually talked about this, so I wouldn't be too concerned. But maybe I just put this on the review for completeness' sake. But Kant, doesn't worry too much about pleasure, right? The real thing, the important thing to remember about Kant is that Kant is focused on making free choices, following through on my choices, respecting the choices of others, acting from reason. So for Kant, pleasure is not going to be all that important for a Kantian. Okay. So what does a virtue ethicist like Aristotle claim is the best life? Well, the virtuous life, right? But not just the virtuous life, right? It has to be virtues rewarded with external goods like pleasure and wealth and honor, right? So I need to live a virtuous life, and through a little bit of luck also get all of these rewards. That's the sort of the best life anyway. Not that that's of course it's a continuum, right? You can more or less approach the best life or be closer to the best life, but the best life, the ideal standard would be somebody who lives through all these virtues and then also lives their life with all these virtues and gets a little bit of luck, and they get rewarded with pleasure and money and wealth and honor, etc. Right? So Aristotle's not going to say that the best life doesn't include pleasure, doesn't include wealth. It's just that it's gained through virtuous activity, through the proper use of our rational capacity to make reflective judgments, the good use of our ability to make reflective judgments.